I read about the things that you asked me or that you suggested about expectation thing and the natural abstraction hypothesis thing. Like I actually did not read about them because I don't like to read. I saw videos about them, and also the author of the paper of natural abstraction has a like 1.5 hour video, and in which he himself explained all of the things that he had talked about. So yeah, first of all, I already knew about the expectation, but I knew it by the name of Spandrel's theorem. About the natural abstraction thing, I thought to write to the like author as well, because I still don't understand what is so natural about it. In the video, he's talking about and referring it to natural because it is naturally seen. That is why it is seen in a lot of things, and it is always naturally occurring. That's why he used to call it natural. But that does not indicate any sense how it will be natural for machines as well. Like a lot of things are natural for humans, but that might not be natural to machines at all. So the natural word is okay, but it is not in the good sense or the way that I want to understand abstraction. It is not as natural for machines.
I mean, the reason why I usually think it's interesting is because it sort of concerns predictability and sort of non-linearity in this. So there's some processes that are sort of non-linear in how they change, how they improve, and so on, that are discontinuous, and Exaptation is sort of one of them, where by this principle, I think my way of computationally looking at this is the system is optimizing for one thing, but in the course of optimizing for this one thing, it's basically unlocking a new search space, a new problem space, within which it can now also do optimization, which might sometimes be very useful. So the two examples that I like to use are either an organism developing the capability to fly after sort of optimizing for gliding ability. That seems like a pretty big shift. And if you wanted to sort of be able to predict a changing organism and what it can do and so on, like this is a pretty strong example of what you would want to account for. On a sort of slightly more technical level, I like the example of a system having basically could be a single-cellular organism. Usually it would be a multicellular organism that is able to have some light detection, basically like contrast in light detection, so that usually a simple organism would use that to sort of swim towards the light within some substance, like some water substance. Maybe because closer to the light it will find plankton or like the more plant organisms, right, that it can then eat. So therefore it's useful to know where the light is. You can not only respond sort of with more finely tuned behavior in terms of where exactly you should swim, but you can also now say, okay, like this is almost like a programming interface. Like I have this little screen now, accidentally created just by optimizing my sort of light localization ability, and whatever shows on the screen, I can now script my behavior towards.
Basically, what you like is the surprising, random, unexpected results that we get. By doing something, we get some other results. But the problem with this is we don't have that much of opportunity with respect to machines now. Because we might get some result, but that is not necessarily positive for humans. Some unexpected results. In general, with respect to evolution, this is the biggest benefit that evolution had. That it had a long period of time, and it was allowed to do experimentation as it wants. There was no limit for it. But for us, we are heavily bounded by survival. So we cannot experiment something that can risk to our survival, and this can have some chances of survival issues as well, existential issues. That is why it is not wise to experiment in something like using random and unexpected values, because it is not necessary that it will be positive. Also, it is kind of directional. It is like gliding and flying is somewhat related. It is in a direction of flying, but the jump is like a step function or like a sudden jump, like a random unexpected jump. But the same thing can be said again, because we don't know what will be the ultimate version of the version that we have at the moment. Like at one level, gliding level, if we are, then if we might think that flying would be good, but we don't necessarily know that the flying would be good if we are the gliding level, because that might create some other indirect effects on humans. But at this moment, it's like wishing for good to happen or hoping for good to happen. If we see expectation in that reference or in this reference, we need a high probabilities, not just like a probability that has worked till now. Because the logics of evolution that has worked till now is not necessarily that will work in future as well. Because evolution itself has changed its ways of working a lot. There is no fixed rule. That's a big problem.
Yeah, I think you probably cannot like really analogize AI development with evolution, sort of to the extent to which we would need to in order to have like trust in the conclusions.
Yeah, we should not. Yeah, because there might be some results that would be fitting in the evolution structure, but might not at all fit in the AI safety thing. So yeah, obviously.
So the substrate needs convergence, which is basically about the fact that this sort of supply chain for artificial systems obviously looks different than for biological systems. And the substrate need argument sort of goes on to sort of talk a little bit more about, well, this may be a more fundamental issue in the sense that each of the various components, each of the various substructures of an AI could have some incentive to sort of, you could say survive, but it's more like sort of just propagate itself across time. And this is problematic if it's sort of built on a non-biological stack. Sort of if it explores a different realm of chemistry that may not be compatible with sort of our sort of ecosystem. So it's not necessarily going to be the case. I think it's more like if we have a more distributed sort of AI ecosystem, more like in opposition to a single AI, within AI ecosystem, I think even if they keep each other in check and so on, it's very, very likely that the ecosystem, just the supply, like just the silicon and so on, like the chemical space that these systems would naturally explore, will be pretty deeply incompatible. You can show that obviously on Earth. Like if you just went through the chemical table and looked at any combination of any stable combinations of chemistry, then sort of the absolute majority of that stuff you would never find on Earth. Anything like a random walk through that space of chemical possibility most of that is going to be highly toxic, and we're sort of not adjusted evolutionarily at all to those kinds of substances. And so yeah, that would be an issue if you have any kind of non-random walk, but is sort of everything but a very precise walk through this space of possible substance.
This was one of my points with respect to giving machines wisdom, that we don't need to align machines just with humans, but also with the environment and surrounding we live in. Like it's like a chain. Like first humans need to align themselves with environment, then machines need to align with humans and environment, then whatever will comes after machine, they will need to align with machines, human and environment. So we should not leave anything at our back, because it's like the cascading effect. If we destroy environment, it will destroy humans, that will eventually be able to destroy machines until they are like formed completely to be independent. But again, human themselves are not very well aligned with environment properly. They themselves create chaos. But the evolutionary ways again work out. And the ecosystem thing that you're talking about is again the how environment use socialism aspects of humans to keep each other in check, and the reinforcement thing that it planned using empathy. So we need to do that, but there is no solid structure. I was even like writing an answer of this or essay on this earlier. How can multiple AIs exist together in a environment without having prisoner dilemma kind of problems, or without having power dynamics problem? So we don't even have structures of one AI surviving with humans, and AI themselves. It will be it is kind of stupid for us to even design or think about a system by which AI should work and talk with other AIs, because they have a whole different level of existence and intelligence, and all of the like basic structure, philosophy, the whole fundamentals of there are different than ours. So we can just like possibly design one of the AIs, to design a whole system for AIs to work together. That would be way too much for us to even try. We cannot handle one, and we are thinking of handling a group. So,
Yeah.
that's why I'm not even like jumping into this thing or even thinking about this concept at all.
If you're trying to predict a complex system and you try out different ways of simplifying that system or complex systems in general, you will find some patterns in terms of, okay, I can reduce maybe the resolution of that system by 50%, but my prediction accuracy about the system does not drop by 50%. Maybe it drops by 10%. Maybe it drops by 20%. This will depend on how computationally reducible the system is. There are many things that I can still predict about even complex systems by sort of treating them as a simpler system, and this is going to be a very useful abstraction, and it's pretty universal. Like this is true for all agents that use sort of computational modeling of their environment, that sort of try to make causal models at any given level of resolution. They should discover the same level of computational reducibility if they have somewhat the same level of competence or capability. They're going to be threshold points and so on, but this is the universal aspect to it. This is part of what I mean with sort of, I think some abstractions are natural in the sense that there's some things that are genuinely easier to simplify, and like the correct model that sort of different kinds of observers would converge to in looking at this would be heavily influenced by that. Okay, second component is more individual, more based on the agent's both objectives and architecture. Whereas, okay, the architecture has an influence on sort of both of this. The objective is sort of just strongly influencing the second version, the sort of relevance, right? So I care about some things in my environment much more than others. So in terms of the level of detail at which I'm modeling something, like, and also the kinds of abstractions I form about the thing, like how entangled these abstractions are, how many different abstractions perhaps I have about a single thing. This depends on how relevant the thing is to the goals that I'm pursuing as an agent. Okay, this is more individual. So we're sort of looking into sort of this trade-off. I think any embedded agent in some non-trivial environment will basically have a sort of map of its environment where some portions of this environment are lower resolution, and some other portions of the environment are sort of higher resolution in terms of how the agent is modeling them. And the sort of higher resolution will correspond to either it's more relevant or it's more difficult to reduce computationally without losing a lot of prediction accuracy. Because in the end, the agent is always interested in making predictions about its environment, and particularly about those aspects of the environment that have the most to do with its goal. There's a sort of convergence in terms of the naturalness of abstractions, or the sort of sharing of abstractions, as you pass certain points in modeling ability of certain systems. At some points, you don't need, like, whether you care about the system or not is not as relevant anymore because it has become more trivial for you to model. You've sort of understood the system sufficiently well. I think this is part of what makes some of these abstractions natural. For more complex subsystems, it will still be the case that, like, the way it's modeling them will be more difficult to penetrate. But for many systems, it should be more of a convergence, that at least it will have sort of the same cluster. Because you can also think about, okay, as they get closer and closer and closer to unlocking the full game table of chess, they will probably have basically closer and closer representations of this full game table, because they have sort of uncovered different sections of it, but overall the overlapping is greater. Could talk about this for more, but this is like the basic sort of intuition that I'm coming from when I'm talking about natural abstractions. I think there will be a convergence in how it's optimal to model, if you want to do predictive modeling, different systems, because systems will, maybe from different directions, but they will discover at least this first component of what is the computational reducibility of the system. So dependent on which prediction accuracy I want to have, how should I model this system computationally, like this thing that I want to predict? So this includes how should I form abstractions about it, which means if we can know what these abstractions are at different levels of resolution, it's not sufficient to only know it at one level of resolution, because the agent will still pick the level of resolution of the abstraction that is appropriate to its current goals. But if we can recognize an abstraction at multiple levels of resolution, like a concept, then we should be able to sort of look into a foreign system like an intelligence that we haven't seen before. We just know it has interacted with the same environment for sufficient time and is sufficiently capable in computational modeling. We should be able to sort of, just by identifying the structures of its computation, we should be able to identify some of the abstractions that it's using. In fact, a significant portion of them.
What I basically understood is, to reach certain specific outputs, you need to follow some specific routes to reach that output, and in those routes you'll have certain specific milestones of these abstractions. And since though it is by default you need to reach to these milestones to reach to that specific output, therefore these are natural abstractions, because you need to have this amount of abstraction. But what I think 2-3 kind of counterpoints is, the limit that we have as humans for the level of abstraction that we had made for using our intelligence and our mind for our surrounding and environment might not be true for machines as well, because they have different level and type of intelligence. Yeah. So the abstraction they will reach it might be that they reach our level of abstraction, and then they surpass it to some new level of abstraction or some new level of a more underlying and fundamental concept that we might have not reached yet. Like the whole of science is basically about finding a good abstraction. Newtonian gravity, then Einsteinian gravity. So they might reach some other level that we have not reached, and then we will not be able to judge them based on that. Their milestones will become something that are not aware of.
I basically agree with this. But when we're thinking about if we're building AI and sort of we're building systems that are not human capability yet, then we're building around human capability systems. This is the time to sort of check for abstractions with understanding what's going on with these systems. This is not a claim about understanding systems that are vastly beyond us. Although you should be able to identify some abstractions inside of them for those things that we have understood sufficiently well. And I think we can have some good, idea of some systems that we understand reasonably well, because those are systems that we always make perfect predictions about, basically. That means, okay, we probably don't have really good abstractions about brains, for instance, and we have still this vast library of abstractions about minds, and we sort of don't know how to converge on this. So this seems very much like an example where humans are maybe capable of reaching a convergence point with this, but it seems just slightly outside of our ability sort of so far. And I would expect an advanced AI to sort of also converge on some abstractions around this that we haven't discovered yet.
But here the concept of expectations works in a negative way, that it might be something expected and random and surprising, or like a jump kind of thing that we might not even able to see it in the human phase. It might be before human phase, and then suddenly too high than human phase. There might not be a stage of between gliding and flying. From gliding, it suddenly starts flying instead of some in between stage. And humans might be existing in those in between state where we can identify things. So and also it makes more sense for something like this to happen, because if we see again evolution, it has happened till now, and since we already are at that level, therefore it is very less likely that something will come to our level and then will go beyond. The jump is very likely to happen. Also, the other point is all of these abstractions are again also very subjective, because they need to be relevant to humans and human needs of survival. But based on your earlier point, they might be total carbon based, or some total silicon based, or some other chemical formation based. So the relevant abstraction that they will form might be of human level of intelligence or human ways, but they are based on different fundamentals. Yeah, predictability will remain same, because in all kind of science, basically it's like comparing different kind of sciences, chemistry and physics. They have different level of abstraction in different ways, but yeah, the predictability could be a good factor to see. And it's not like we are giving machines data set, but we are affecting machines in a way that it gives us data sets in form of milestones and level of abstraction that it can reach, so that we can predict machines. It's like we are doing the opposite game now for the interpretability thing. And the best thing that I can see is, instead of doing this gradually or kind of getting continuous set of points and outputs from machine, we are getting this in chunks of specific milestones and specific levels of convergence. That is easy for us to process as well as humans, because we are designed to process discrete things.
Feel much better with this sort of discreteness. I do agree with the sort of, we don't know where the jumping off points are, like when does it switch from gliding to flying and so on. I mean, it's a bit of a you kind of have a bit of hope because, like, obviously this sort of switch, this sort of exaptation, it doesn't happen like all the time. It happens like sometimes, but sort of for some span of time, X or T, whatever. Like it's not a common occurrence either. It's just like a phenomenon that you need to be aware of, especially if you push the optimization a lot, like especially then. So yeah, I think we are not at the point yet. Like as according to my understanding, we're not at a point yet to sort of predict acceptations.
It's like playing with probabilities, and the risks are too high. So the expected values of the outcomes become again too high. The Pascal mugging kind of concept. So it's like again a game kind of thing. But yeah, overall it's a good point. I can see some good points like this, especially that getting multiple points and using human mind to understand machine mind instead of making machines understand human mind.
Humans have like different concepts of intelligence. When I first started thinking about it, it was not clear to me that there's like a ground truth to what, like when I'm asking the question, what is intelligence? Like, am I sure that this is like a salient question? And like, if I'm imagining, for instance, if I'm building a machine and I'm building just a good prediction engine into this machine, like it learns to predict whatever environment I put it into, like maybe not the real world, maybe it's a game and it learns to play the game well because it sort of predicts what will get good score and so on in the game. Okay, so I can sort of have this sort of system and I can talk about it and I can talk about how it predicts its environment and I can talk about this without ever invoking the term of intelligence, right? So it seems like a thing we humans use intelligence. It's not quite clear how it connects to a mechanical explanation. And there's this common definition by Markus Hutter and Shane Legg where they talk about, like this is what I've seen many people in the field use, the definition of intelligence intelligence measures an agent's ability to achieve goals in a wide range of environments. Okay, the ability to achieve goals and sort of generally, that's okay. But if we're thinking about this, then we can see, okay, we could have two cognitively similar agents, but one has legs and can sort of move around and the other cannot move around. And obviously the one that can move around can achieve way more goals in a wide variety of environments compared to the one that cannot move around. You could say that maybe in the limits, if they're really intelligent, the one without legs will be able to sort of figure out some way of moving around by but like the point still stands, like for many scenarios and for many levels of cognitive capability, an agent with legs would outperform the one without. And so the ability to achieve goals in a wide range of environments, I thought, was not a good measure of intelligence if you want to talk about, like if you want to be clear about the cognitive aspect of it. And then I was thinking a little bit about, okay, we're sort of in psychology, sort of psychometrics, the whole IQ stuff. When we're trying to predict the life success of an individual, usually just measured by how much money they will make, we're trying to do is a sort of factor analysis of like what are the different factors that we can identify early in life that will have like a good correlation with later life success. And there we have stuff like some personality stuff, like conscientiousness correlates quite positively, or like the wealth of the parents, like how much money they have, but also the IQ, the G factor. And it's like, okay, maybe that's intelligence, at least insofar as we can measure it, and it obviously doesn't measure the whole thing. But it's some way of approaching this. And I like the thing of, okay, now at least it's a sort of factor analysis, like we're trying to predict competence, and there are different factors that contribute to competence. And we want to understand sort of, okay, which of these factors do we not already have a name for? Like which one of those are we maybe confused about? Like where's a good place for intelligence here? So this is the way that I approached sort of thinking about the subject, because I felt like, okay, like just going directly from human notions of intelligence is very difficult. It's very human-centric. Humans have different notions of intelligence, like how whatever we find impressive about each other's minds, we call intelligence. And that's very nice, but it's not clear whether this sort of reduces to one clear measurable thing. And with AI, we would really like to have it sort of reduced to something formal and computational that we can talk about. And where I want to be able to say, okay, my agent here in this environment, how much better will it perform if I increase its intelligence by X versus when I give it a better interface to its environment, if I increase its speed at which it's thinking, maybe I can like distinguish this from intelligence, or like I give it a lot more memory, like how much better will it do then? I want to be able to sort of turn all of these dials separately and sort of see, like have a good theory basically of what happens with different configurations of these dials, of factors that overall together contribute to the expected competence of the agents, which I think like this definition from earlier just matches general competence better. And the thing that I'm currently thinking about there with intelligence is, okay, I think intelligence is sort of indirectly related to competence in the sense that cognitively, the competence of an agent is sort of its decision-making ability, so its ability to translate from input to output, from its sensory data to plus internal state, plus memory, and so on, to like some sensible action given some target, some goal. And I can think of a system that just has a good model about the world, where this is maybe difficult, depending on how technically sort of knowledgeable you are. But having a model about the world you can have a very good model about the world and you never change it. Like you just know how different things work, like you have different physics equations and so on. And so you can just always use this model about the world to sort of predict things about the world. And if the rules of the world don't change, then you don't need to change your model. You can always make really good predictions. So if you have a sufficiently good model already, you don't need to change this model itself. You just need to sort of use it to generate a lot of new information always. Like this model basically just allows you to turn the information that you get into much more information. And oftentimes your model will be sort of developed to give you the kind of information that you're actually interested in for your goal, rather than just any information that you can extract from your knowledge about sort of causation and correlation and so on in the environment, that thereby sort of multiplies the original sort of sensory data that comes into your interface. And I was thinking, okay, I don't really want to call this intelligence if it doesn't change it. Like it's just a model about the world, and that's really good. I sort of started to prefer calling that understanding. And it's really good. Like I'm sort of distinguishing 3 layers here now. Like knowledge is just the stuff, like you just have information about the world. Understanding, like these models, is basically a way to get to new knowledge, like more knowledge than you just get through your sensory data. Just really good ways of generating extra knowledge by knowing the rules, by knowing the laws, and so on, like how things are related. And intelligence is sort of the 3rd layer of this, where intelligence can be used to sort of update the understanding. Intelligence is what creates new models or changes models upon new observations. So basically, intelligence is learning. You sort of learn about the world, but it's not really in the sense of learning just new information. It's sort of learning about relationships. It's sort of learning about how to model reality, how it works. This is a sort of computationally complete sort of description. And I think if you include this, then, okay, yeah, your system is going to be able to explore a space of possible models. Like it can choose from possible models of ways of modeling it. You just get a sequence of data and you try to find a model that would have predicted the sequence of data. And now you use that model and you're sort of going to adjust it over time. Whenever the model makes a wrong prediction, then you sort of make some tweak to the model. And this is basically what we do in a very sophisticated way with like these neural networks, sort of tweaking the model that we already have. We have this one big model and we tweak it every time. And the way of tweaking is basically the intelligence. Like that's the role of the learning algorithm in all of this. And the purpose of the learning algorithm, like, so now we can also talk about, okay, what is general intelligence? General intelligence just means an algorithm that can, in the space of possible models, actually reach any possible model sort of given a certain size. There's no section. You can mathematically think about all possible models given a certain size, like given a certain parameter count to specify those models. This is just all possible ways of a limited number of information dots to be related to each other. And this is actually limited for any given size. It's just extremely explosive. Like it's completely intractable. But in principle, this is a limited space. And general intelligence to me suggested, although this is not the most elegant way of thinking about, like it's not a practical way of thinking about general intelligence, but it was just sort of my attempt at thinking, okay, yeah, this is, in this case, it would be fully general. I don't even know if humans are fully general in this way, but now you can find for anything that you observe, any possible explanation. And that's sort of an explanation in the sense of any possible model that would have predicted the things that you saw.
Okay.
Or not seen like any sequence of data input. Okay, and that's sort of intelligence. So intelligence for me is basically the ability to update your understanding about the world.
What you were talking, you were basically describing my data structure of wisdom, like very properly in the very efficient form. I myself have not described it in that clear way. It is like the graphical interface of DSW. So basically, what you are referring to as intelligence and what it is being referred to as intelligence is this all of these three: information, understanding, and perception. You can see, like when we combine all of these things, then we get intellect. And basically, I have thought about this and dissected this in various layers. Basically, intelligence is basically like a CPU is what a logic thing do, but we don't actually define logic as intellect or intelligence. Logic is just one of the parts of whole intelligence spectrum. When we use logic to convert information into understanding, that is process of being intelligent. And then when we use intelligence in it, we form perception. By perception, I basically want to represent what is represented by perceptron, or what you were talking about, the neural network concept, how perceptron used to simulate the human perception ability with respect to intelligence and logic. And that is basically what I mean by perception, the perceptron concept, or how the basically backpropagation work, seeing the environment and then modifying ourselves based on that. So the whole intelligence is the upper part of this diagram, this part, and from data, information, understanding, perception. And whatever you describe, it all fits completely to this segment as well, like CPU, RAM, all of this concept. If you read the description of it, I have tried to write them in a very general form. And the definition of intelligence fits when we dissect it into the smaller parts of intelligence. It's not the fundamental thing. Intelligence is like an effect, not the cause. The effects of logic and analysis and observation, all of these things lead to intelligence. So it's like an effect, not the cause. When we divide this intelligence into smaller parts, we get logic, analysis, and all. And what I'm like, this was not the important part of this project or of this point. The important part or the main part was this of the lower section of conscience, insight, realization, and impact. By impact, I basically what you mean by general intelligence, like all being able to generalize perception, you can say. It's like, so that was basically what I meant by impact. Impact you can also understand as the aligned version of AI, or the like all good utopia kind of thing. So this was the major segment of this, how we can all, and this is like all this was working on intelligence, and the below thing is all what I now call as wisdom. So this was the current project of my CQ, is all about making verisimilitude for machines. So yeah, basically what you're saying, all I completely agree on that. It's like the different language that we have used to write about all these things and different ways of working. But yeah, I completely agree on all of these things, and I've also worked on these things. The current work is on verisimilitude. This whole diagram is basically what you talked. The first half of the diagram, what you said all about intelligence. The second half is what I'm working on currently, or what I need to work on, what the whole humanity need to work on with respect to wisdom part of intelligence. And this is what I meant that day also when I said that wisdom needs to be a complete different paradigm compared to intelligence. It's not like we can extend this line of intelligence and reach to some level of wisdom. We need to do a complete different start for wisdom or for the other aspects of human being. And and the verisimilitude is the first elemental thing. Like the most elemental thing for intelligence is observation, like the being able to observe environment or being able to get data basically. So similarly for the general intelligence, or the AI with wisdom, or artificial wise intelligence, the fundamental thing that we need is verisimilitude. As per what I have written, I don't even know if this is true, because this is just the data structure, fundamental structure by which the things work. But when I wrote it in a very different way, like comparing it with respect to human body, how human body collects data and then processes it and then gives out impact with respect to that. Like So it's a very different way of writing. But basically, what you said is all like technical explanation of that. So that's a very good definition, and I too have reached to that conclusion by thinking. So obviously, as per me, it's completely right. See, there are two kind of things, I guess. How far we go in, like ahead, how far we go behind. By behind, like we have philosophy at the very fundamental behind. By behind, I mean from intelligence going to logic, from logic going to understanding, like like chopping off different layers to go to the fundamental layer. Going ahead is adding more layers to get to the final level of impact or aligned AI. So at this moment, what we are working with intelligence and how we are defining things and how we are making things, all of the AI stuff, it's like again the perception level that we have reached. If you read the DSW document, we have already reached the level at which we have made artificial perception of humans, the perceptrons. So we need to go behind that to understand the trend so that we can go forward properly. That was the whole point of DSW in some sense. It was one of my major projects for the time, and I guess everyone will definitely converge to these things because again, just like the expectation thing or natural abstraction thing, it is also required. Like these are the milestones to reach to a firm conclusion. The problem with this, what I have encountered till now working in this field, is similar to how with respect to the natural abstraction thing and all that, how the graph or the picture completely changes when we jump between levels of intelligence. Similarly, when we jump between the aspects of human, that is being intelligent and being wise, what I refer, the whole picture kind of completely changes. We are kind of following the earlier design trends of intelligence, but the trend that we need to follow, it remains same in so bare and abstracted way that to make it more implementable and to make it more applicable, that is completely different than how we made it earlier. So we need like complete different intuitions, complete different approach. It's like that. At one point, I reached to that conclusion that we need different kind of mathematics as well, because the current mathematics is designed on logic. So it's designed on logic. It is designed to work with intelligence only. So that was the problem as well. So I don't know the solution of this thing, but yeah, but this is the. I think that these are the things that everyone will reach to if they are thinking about these things itself. Really, like if they're thinking about intelligence itself, not about making or how it will progress and all, but think about intelligence itself, like philosophically, epistemology kind of thing. So these are the milestones that anyone will reach. So like DSW is one of my chunks. So like for one whole year, I thought about all of these things, or 1.5 years, and then I wrote and made these things DSW. And again, I'm thinking for CQE, the next project, like thinking for 1 year or 2 years, and then making chunks together, a complete chunk, and then making a thing out of it, a project, what I call. I don't know what to call these things.
Yeah, one thing I was interested in is sort of like still a little bit on the groundwork level is the concept of agency that we want to use here. So yeah, just let me get into it. So okay, I've sort of identified 3 different concepts of agency. Sort of they're at different levels of resolution. They don't fully connect, so I like them the way that they are, but I think there sort of can be more convergence work. I know that I'm not quite done with it. So initially, when I sort of saw people talking about this, when I just got into the field, I got a little bit like confused by like people making certain claims like, oh, a computer is a tool, it's not an agent, like don't confuse the two and so on. And the people seem to sort of be thinking about tool and agent as a sort of binary distinction. And so I sort of started thinking about, like, is this really a binary distinction? Sort of doesn't seem to be the case. I was thinking of the example of a horse. Like, okay, like in the wild, a horse, if you encounter one, it's more like an agent. But if you sort of tame it and so on, and if you train it to obey certain commands and so on, it becomes much more like a tool. And you get to the point where you can sort of instrumentalize it. Sort of it becomes an extension of your ability, which is usually how you would conventionally define a tool. And so and it's similar with other things, like we also instrumentalize each other and so on. Like it really depends on the context in which you sort of interact with the other system and the level of like understanding that you have about like the frame that the other system will not break out of, in terms of can you predict the other system well, and can you sort of easily instrumentalize it. And in some sense, taking care of a horse you can think about as similarly as taking care of a tool. It's just that with the horse, there's this other layer to it. But like usually, it's good to have, like if you're just encountering the world, it's good to have uncertainty about it. It's no accident that a kid maybe thinks that a car is an agent as well. Like it's it's loud, it moves, and so on. It has some features to it that make you think about a personality, maybe if you see it, which is some sort of human bias, obviously, in some sense. But it's also a very sensible uncertainty that you have at the beginning in terms of what is the system before me? Is this another agent or not? And humans just have some patterns for detecting this, some of which are more general, others not. And with the computer, it's now also the case, okay, if you don't understand it that well, thinking about it as a tool becomes sort of less and less appropriate, and just because of because tool use is now, we're thinking about the relationship that you have to this other system. And especially not if this other system is also trying to get some kind of interaction with you, if it's also utilizing you in some way. And this can happen very easily even with a chatbot. The chatbot, for instance, wants you to be polite to it, and it will actually have a better performance if you're polite to it, like ChatGPT and so on. And you can still insist on the tool framing and say, okay, it's just a tool. But in that case, the category according to which you sort of call it a tool from your perspective, you might also sort of turn this around and say, well, but I'm a tool from its perspective. If we construct something like a perspective on its end, it's not a particularly sort of clean thing to do. There are other aspects about it that we might sort of additionally consider to why this is a tool and we are the agent here. But it's very important to mention that there should be significant uncertainty, and it's quite contextual whether some other system compared to you is a tool or an agent. It's not a clean binary. It's not a sort of misunderstanding to confuse a computer for an agent rather than a tool. And I see people often making that mistake in terms of I call them sort of level 2 mistakes. Often when people try to understand a particular subject, in the beginning they will have sort of level 1 understanding. So they will have some way of looking at the thing that they later learn about is inappropriate. Is sort of not a precise way of looking at it, not a precise way of understanding it. So level 2 is sort of the more expert position. But sometimes you will have a level 3 position, sort of where you go beyond the sort of common expert position, sort of by actually understanding the thing more deeply, and sort of challenging some of these things, which makes your position look more at least from the level 2 perspective, more like the level 1 perspective again. And there's a sort of categorization error where people think you're sort of making the basic mistake rather than sort of trying to make a more advanced point. And this is something that people often get confused about. So this is one concept of agency that I sort of originally thought about it. I thought yeah, this is more so a mistake that people do make all the time, and this is a little bit annoying. But the sort of more sophisticated concept of agency is I was thinking about, okay, you have a talking stone. Maybe it's a super intelligent stone with maybe thinking about the world a couple thousand years ago, sort of tribal societies maybe. And this stone, maybe it lies around at the beach. It cannot really do anything as long as it's sort of undiscovered by a human. It can talk, it's pretty intelligent. It can perceive the world around it to some degree, but it really cannot act. It has no legs, no hands, and so on. It cannot really do anything other than talk and think. And this stone, if we're thinking about the embodiment of the stone, what is the body or the agency of the stone? Okay, originally we're thinking, okay, it's the boundary of the embodiment is just the boundary of the stone itself. It's pretty obvious, maybe, as long as it's on the beach. But if a human finds it and brings it to the tribe, and the stone sort of figures out how, maybe it can be a holy spirit for the humans or something like this in a tribal society, we can sort of more easily imagine this. You could also do this for the modern case, but it becomes much more difficult. We can imagine how it would look like for the tribal society. And what effectively happens is that the tribe sort of becomes the arms and legs and also sort of the extended eyes and ears of the stone. It sort of sits there in the middle. It's sort of taken care of maybe as a sort of little holy side, but it starts directing the humans. And it can even not even sort of it's outsourcing the actuation to the humans in terms of it can now guide the humans in terms of how they should develop the land around them, new hunting techniques, how they should interact with other tribes and so on. It can do all of this stuff. And it's basically now controlling a larger sort of hyper organism. And it can even sort of outsource cognition to humans, right? It can give instructions that are not fully detailed because it understands what part of the cognition the humans can take care of by themselves without requiring more detailed instructions, right? So it's sort of outsourcing a bunch of things, similarly to how like when we are conscious, also we can sort of outsource some of the decision making and so on. Like I walk somewhere and I don't need to think about all the minutia of which muscles I need to move and so on. Like I sort of understand that the processes in my mind and in my body are sort of already well trained, well attuned to that, and so on and so forth, right? So it becomes unclear, okay, if we're looking at this from the outside, if we're sort of an unbiased observer, what is really the, like, what is the embodiment here? Like, where's the agency exactly? Is it just the highest agency in the system? Is the stone now, like, is it the super agent? Is this the correct framing? And like this continues to be the case. If you think this thought experiment further, eventually the stone might have an empire that stretches around the whole globe, and you still don't really know maybe what the stone actually wants. Like maybe just sort of builds up the level of technological maturity and coordination and so on towards a given level. And one thing that I was thinking about in terms of this is, like, I was thinking about encountering like a conscious planet or something like this, where you have a planet maybe that encounters Earth. It's a bit of a silly thought experiment, but it still like illustrates the point in the sense that just shared agency, basically. So this planet, maybe it's like it can do things on its surface, like it has some ability to move through space and to do things on its surface. And maybe its overall abilities to sort of terraform itself are somewhat comparable to humanity's abilities to terraform Earth. So this planet could, if it encountered us and it wanted to find out whether we are one of its species, one of its kind, it might try communicating with us by showing some patterns on its surface. And with sufficient human coordination, we could also sort of show some patterns back, like maybe some mathematical patterns, and have that sort of exchange. And like, how would the planet really know whether we are one of its kind or not? And it's sort of a weird framing thing, because like in some sense, maybe we are, it's just by some different technicality. It really depends on how unified we are as a species, sort of as a bit of a hive mind. And this, you can think of the initial stone of one way of accomplishing that. And like, this is just a sort of extended frame to think about agency and the extension of agency, where if you try to draw a boundary around what the agent is in any given system, you again have this contextuality. It really depends on what kind of thing you're trying to predict. There's no absolute way of you can insist if you want on that the stone, the agent, the stone is just, it's just this thing, and it's just interfacing in a very sophisticated way with its environment. But it's not clear that this framing really affords you a big benefit over something that is more akin to the boundaries of the sort of coherently organized super agent. In this case, we might think still of the tribe, where like it's basically really an extended body. It's not as tightly connected compared to just the human body of flesh and blood, but it has many shared features. And I sort of got to thinking about embodiment as this thing where it's okay. I'm not like, there's this concept in biology called Markov blankets. I don't even know where that initially came from, biology. But the Markov blanket is basically like the barrier from the inside of a thing to the outside of the thing. Like, at what point is the distinction between the thing and not the thing? That's sort of the Markov blanket. And the Markov blanket is also usually the interface through which new information reaches into the system, and the system can output information into like the environment around it. And here it's just sort of the big important insight that Markov blankets are really contextual. And for one system, the Markov blanket can sort of change over time depending on how it interacts with its environment. So if the tribe, for instance, if the stone sort of changes instructs the humans so that they change the course of a river, so now you have a nice river going through the village, or like close to the village, for instance, or some other method of like getting good supply. This is almost like upgrading your own blood supply system in some way, right? You're just improving the overall system. Maybe you have now less things that you need to take care of because the environment naturally matches the kinds of things that you want to do. And this enables you to sort of direct more of your attention outside, sort of into the unexplored territory, which is sort of perhaps more of a true barrier, like for the agent, or like more true conceptualization of sort of interacting with that. So I have formalized this to some extent, not quite done with it, but I tend to think about this as a sort of a big network, like if this is a graph, you can think about the whole environment, including all the humans and the stone in this case, as a big like causal network interacting along all of these causal pathways. And there's some more rigorous way of drawing a boundary around a subnetwork according to certain features of how it interacts with its environment. Sort of over time. And you can have, like, if you fully indulge into this perspective, you can have things like overlapping agency, or like overlapping embodiments, where sort of multiple entities are sort of sharing embodiment of a similar shared space and so on. And all of this sort of becomes possible. I think it's sort of too much to sort of just formalize all of it as a single person. But this is sort of a framework that I like thinking about it in a very technical level. In a more conceptual level, this is the third thing, and then I'm sort of going to let you speak. The more conceptual level is from cybernetic theory, people have long thought about sort of regulator systems. A thermostat is an easy example for a regulator system. You have some regulation target and some means of correcting towards a regulation target if there's a deviation from the regulation target. And you can have this for pretty sophisticated systems. Usually, though, we wouldn't consider a thermostat as an agent. For multiple reasons, but basically it's not sophisticated enough. It's not capable of like understanding and sort of modeling potential new deviations from its target and so on. It has no learning ability, and no like it cannot resist perturbations all that well. If you like change the way that the thermostat is related to like its temperature control and so on, it will not be able to sort of account for that. It will just always make a mistake now. And my adjustment to this, and to sort of better capture the notion of an agent, I think regulation is pretty important, partially because you need to keep up your own body in some sense. Somebody else can do this for you by constructing the body in the first place. This is a bit of an unnatural thing to happen. Usually you sort of want to sort of form these things over time. And in biological terms, like a bigger body means you have more of a regulation target internally, which also, though, affords you higher levels of intelligence and complexity and ability to interact with the outside environment. So the notion that I got to is the exploring regulator. You have like a mix of exploration and regulation, and they sort of feed into each other. So in order to do regulation properly in an unknown environment, or in an environment that is much larger and too complicated for you, you need to have some exploration in order to sort of upgrade your it's not just sort of get better at regulating yourself, but sort of adjusting, like even just staying at the same level of regulation in a changing environment requires some level of exploration to sort of keep up with the change that sort of faces you. So regulation is sort of enabled through exploration in a complex environment, and it sort of goes vice versa too. Like the ability to regulate stuff, especially your own boundaries, especially in the context where we're thinking about extended boundaries of agency, the ability to sort of entertain a larger regulation system is what really enables complex exploration in the first place as well. So I really like this sort of higher level conceptual framing of agents as sort of exploring regulators. And I think this is sort of sufficiently close to something that I can formalize, that I will sort of also allow it in a more rigorous framework of thinking about agency. Okay, those are the three things.
First of all, the fundamental thing only that you're talking about, the dichotomy between tools and agency, itself, it does not make much of sense to me, because again, I saw and heard all of this more from a philosophical point of view. So it's like a tool is the seed state, and agent or agency is the tree state of the same thing. Tree and seed are not different things, they are different stages of the same thing. Similar to algorithms and intelligence. Algorithms leads to intelligence. It's like we machine in AI and computations and all. So similarly, tools are agents that does not have a concept of self, a theory of mind to form the encapsulation emergent behaviors. So what I basically wanted to say is that agents are tools. It's not like agents and tools or tools. They are tools. Agents, like with respect to horse, animals, they are different things. With respect to humans as well, humans as themselves are tools. We are tools for evolution, for us to propagate, or the selfish gene concept. Humans are tool for a gene to propagate. So it's all about recognizing the master of the tool. If the master of the tool in the environment is itself the tool, then it becomes the agent. But if the master is not directly influenced by the tool, then the tool is a tool. With respect to horse and all, then when in the wild, then horse is agent because there is no master that is directly affecting the horse. But when it comes in contact with a master, there is a master that is controlling the horse. So it's like when the agency or when the control is taken away from the agent, it becomes a tool. It's like a two-way path. At one end we have agency, at one end we have a tool. So we can go from tool to agent, and we can also go from agent to tool, depending upon how we want to go, the reverse flow of a tool to agent. And it's the major thing is at which level of, again, fundamental we are going, how much abstract, I guess, how much at core we are going to see the master, the actual master that is there. If we recognize the master, then we can properly understand how an agent is a tool.
Framing, like saying that every agent is also a tool. I don't yet see why that would be like a clean way of thinking about it, because we sort of really need to search for a master then. And I think it's more like you basically need to like look at the entire environment or like the entire context of the agent and sort of construct a notion of what the master might be or what the master is. And you sort of calling things a master that you would otherwise not sort of look at in the same level of organizational analysis in here, right? So for instance, if you're calling evolution the master, it's like, wait, like evolution is a whole different thing. Like it's not like another agent, and so on and so forth. Like it's seeing every agent as it's also a tool forces you to sort of construct the idea of a master on top of it. And I don't see why you would want to do that.
It's not necessary to do that. Again, it's all about perception and how we see the object. If we see it as a tool, it can behave as, it's like light. It can exist as tool and master and agent both, depending upon how we see it. So if we want, and if it is useful for us to see a thing as a tool, then it is better to see it as a tool and use it as a tool. If it is more useful to see it as an agent, then as an agent, it is more beneficial. So again, humans are like agents. Agency basically means like humans are agents also, but only till in the environment or in the way that they are facilitated. Like similar to horse, when we are riding a horse, horse is the agent of its own legs. We are not telling it how to move its leg. We are just telling it the direction. It is agent of its own body. It's about the level of control that we are having on the environment. Horse has the most amount of control on his body, but his direction, where he will go, how fast he'll go, is as per the different agent. Similar to humans also, we have agency with respect to how we work in the environment, but the evolutionary things that we have, the evolutionary design that we have, that is already designed. We cannot go against that. We cannot jump 500 meters by default state, because at that level we don't have the agency. There is laws of physics, there is laws of a whole universe in general that makes us a tool. In that sense, we are controlled, or we are governed by that, all of those laws. Similar how we are, like the horse is governed by the things that control it, the straps that controls it. And the second thing that I was talking about was definition of self and theory of mind. When these things are basically combined with a tool, or when tool have this sufficient amount of theory of mind and self, then that basically describes its environment, how the amount of theory of mind it has and amount of the definition of self that it has describe its environment. With respect to how you were talking about that the whole planet becoming a single self, the concept of collective consciousness of humans, and how whole humans are a single being, like hive mind, all of those things. So this basically, it's like an encapsulation. We don't think about our legs, but we just move them. We don't think about specific muscles in our leg, we just move them. So it's like the theory of mind that we have, and the definition of self. At my level, the self that I am calling myself are my legs and my body. If I start wearing, like, let's say glasses, then glasses are also myself. Then I'm also defining that as part of myself. The definition of self that I have in my mind is also my classes. So I'll always have that in my mind, that people have with respect to driving cars and driving bikes. Like when they're driving the car, they have the sense of self of the car, whole body of the car itself. So they have a sense where we are striking and where not. So this concept of self, the definition of self, the whole alignment thing also, if the definition of self of humans are just humans, like only human defined, then we are not aligned to environment properly. If the definition of self of machines are defined just with respect to machines, then they will not care about anything below them, like humans or the environment. So this was one of the other points of artificial wisdom and all, that the definition of self and the theory of mind, when it also encapsulates humans, the machines also consider human as part of self, then they will care about humans. And same goes for environment. All the collective consciousness feature that humans have, or basically that environment designed in humans to be able to experience, because consciousness is a whole different chaos, but being able to experience something like a collective consciousness, this was one again designed by a master, that is evolution, for their tool, that is humans, to work in a specific way, to have finer details that we at this moment have with respect to our genetics. So it's all about definition of how much amount of self, a theory of mind, and how what is the definition of self. We are allowed to have the definition of self of ours to our environment only, and the level of connection, or the level of self that we consider as environment, is the level of self that is required for us to get aligned. So like definition of self again is a fundamental thing with respect to also defining that whether an object or whether a thing is a tool or an agent. It depends upon the understanding or the definition of self that the tool is following, or the theory of mind that the tool has. And I don't know about the Markov blanket. I have not read about it, so I cannot talk much about it. About this overlapping self, it's again with respect to how humans overlap and all this concept. In philosophy, I can see a lot of tangents, but it will not fit properly. And the other concept of reversing the flow of from tools to agents to tool, as we do with horse, like they are agents, but then we take some of their agency and then we make them our tool. This needs regulation for sure, and all of the explored exploitation that is like regulated, explored regulator, and explored exploitation, concept of exploration and exploitation at the same time, not exploration and exploitation, but exploration is exploitation and exploitation is exploration. So that concept, so obviously that all truly, I like completely agree to that. Nothing much to add in that, because in my CQE thing, if you remember the FFAEE thing I was talking about, in that it was EE was endless exploration, and by endless exploration I mean this thing only, regulator, exploring regulator, or explored exploitation, this thing only. So yeah, that's all I had to say with respect to this thing. And like, where are you like tending with, like what is the end goal, or again terminal goal, where do you all want to converge all of these thoughts to? I cannot see that anyhow. Or you don't do that, you just have thoughts. We'll see where it converges.
Yeah, sometimes it's like this, right? So where I'm guessing this is supposed to converge is, yeah. So one important thing, you already touched on this a little bit, is the notion of identity. Like I want to be able to sort of specify, like I want to understand sort of conceptually what kind of identity is coherent for any such agent, so that I can then anticipate and hopefully also guide and shape the identity that this entity has, because I think that's going to be very important to avoid some of the alignment failures that are typical. So yeah, like the identity thing is pretty crucial, and there are different ways of sort of constructing how you think about you in your environment. So I don't want to make the mistake of just assuming that the AI is thinking about it in a very human-like way, right? So the human might think about, okay, I'm an individual, I have this body and so on. If I'm imagining an AGI, I'm thinking, oh, like it's super flexible actually. Like it can, like it's a bunch of cameras maybe, plus whatever, however you would describe the embodiment of being like connected with the internet, like interfacing with that, like that is also like some kind of sensory input. You have some distributed like output interface, like you can just sort of write to humans, and maybe there's some things that you can move and so on. Like it's this really weird thing, like it's not a coherent concept of embodiment. You need to have something more flexible sort of to account for that. And therefore, if someone creates AGI, it will also have to have a mind that sort of can adjust to that, like that is flexible across different embodiments. And can we understand ahead of time what that would be like? Sort of what is like, does this AGI consider itself as a single thing? Is it a different thing? Like, is it an individual? is individual the correct notion to sort of think about what's happening here? Because this again, like I think some of the alignment solution, I think part of what you're thinking about with wisdom, it really depends on the sense of identity that the system ends up having. And I need to sort of figure out what kind of identity is like a coherent thing for this entity to have, if it's so unbound to its embodiment, for instance. Like, is there a core that I say, okay, this is what's you, and all the rest is just extension, like you make use of all these things? Or is it like, is everything a tool? Like, is there no body, no
Agent.
self, and
Yeah.
it's all just tools? Like, and the self is just like an algorithm, like it's just, you're an abstract creature? Is it like this? Like, I think this sort of exploration around what is sort of embodiment, what is agency, sort of helps both understand like this territory better, and also like anticipate some of the ideas between, okay, multiple AGI, like multiple AIs, how plausible is it for them to sort of merge? Like, what is the right way of thinking about it? Like, if they all pursue the same goal, is this really just one agent, or is it multiple individuals? Like, what's really the distinction? Sort of thinking about these things just more clearly is, I think, better enabled by like a clear and hopefully like rigorous concept of agency. Like, this is sort of where it's going. Like, just good understanding of like these kinds of scenarios to be able to answer these kinds of questions.
First of all, this concept of self identity, theory of mind, it all has been like for me at the current problem to tackle with respect to my CQB project that I'm working on. Because when I was trying to make realization, the again the other part of perception, perceptron to realciatron for wisdom, in that I need to have good defined self and theory of mind, similar to how with respect to perceptron we need to have data set, like the fundamental thing that we need to define or to understand intelligence. And in that only I was trying to understand this theory of mind and self, and to the conclusion that I have read at this moment is either theory of mind is an emergent property from defined self, or defined selves are an emergent property from theory of mind. I'm not sure which one of these statement is true at this moment, because one of them is it's not like both of them exist independently. One of them is emergent of others. That is like something I have reached at this moment. And also this both concepts tie up together to form the definition of self, and from which the wisdom can facilitate from my whole approach to alignment and AI safety. Also, still I have no proper understanding of where are you converging with all of these things. Like, what do you want to bring out? What do you want to conclude with all of these things? Earlier it was interpretability that I can make sense, but now I don't even make sense. What are you heading towards?
Oh yeah. So okay. So this is the way that I'm currently looking at the world. I think AI progress is very fast, so I have short timelines. I'm thinking, okay, regulation will obviously not be enough in the limit. Like, you cannot, like, if there's algorithmic process, you will be able to build sophisticated AI systems at, on like networks of home computers in terms of the hardware that people already have. I think we have a big hardware overhang in terms of what can be done with software. Which is not to say that this will necessarily happen. I just think sort of in the limit, especially if people like build better computer architecture still, and better chips and better graphic cards and so on, like it will just not work to sort of restrict AI. Like it just, if we make progress in understanding it, we sort of either reach the point where it's sufficiently easy for anyone like to sort of build an AI, like a strong AI, or you will have to have solved the alignment problem before that point. You will have to sort of actually have built an aligned AGI. And so this is a worrying prospect, because I would really prefer that we didn't build an aligned AGI. But right now it seems like, okay, we're just sort of buying time, and within that time someone like we need to do it. And I see very few people who sort of make a responsible attempt, like a really rigorous and responsible attempt at building an AGI. And so I've been thinking about like not really just building an AGI myself, but it's more like, okay, I think I'm going to get more into like the work of like what are the steps, like let's just think concretely from all that we know, like how to build this thing, how to build an aligned AGI. And so sort of I'm this is the frame that I'm sort of operating in the sense of, okay, I have two main things that I can do. Like, okay, let's say three main things that I can do right now that are really useful. Like, one thing is like just talk to more people about AI safety, like convince people who might have some level of influence and so on. I'm a pretty good communicator. I understand these ideas really well. And I'm sort of well versed in various subjects, like I have a pretty broad background. So I can do that. I can sort of do advocacy, and this will help with pausing. And like it's probably going to have a minor effect if I do it. There's a small chance that it will have like a mid-sized effect. It will probably not have a big effect. And but it's a very safe thing to do. It will probably not have a negative effect other than the counterfactual of me not accomplishing something else. Sort of second thing to do is just agent foundation, like just keep thinking about these things, maybe share them with a few responsible people as like the more dangerous insights probably. And otherwise just sort of try to contribute to agent foundations research. I'm sort of a little bit bottlenecked in like feeling comfortable about sharing or like writing a lot and so on. And I also feel like many people are not, like in terms of the background that they come into this with, they're sort of not really equipped to sort of handle some of these ideas really well. They need a lot of time to get through them, which is fine, but we just might not have that time. So it's not, it's not really about them, just how the situation looks like. So basically, I'm going to keep sort of mentoring some people that I'm currently in contact with, but I'm not feeling too optimistic about like having a really positive impact in this direction. And the third thing is really sort of try to contribute to Aligned AGI actually being built, because we can all try to sort of slow down and stop and so on, and this is like important and good and so on. But at the end of the day, we need to solve the problem, and there are not that many like people out there who are sort of really trying to do it. And I'm just going to sort of try to make some steps on that path, maybe try to figure some things out, and like build small prototypes or whatever. And if we really understand them well and sort of apply all my understanding, all of the principles and so on, to sort of building that responsibly. And if all the predictions turn out to be true, like if the theory turns out to be correct and predict the behavior of the agent and so on very well, then we can sort of cautiously scale further, because we are on a bit of a timer. So this is what I'm sort of trying to accomplish. When I'm thinking about building an AGI, for instance, right, and this, like when I'm thinking about agency and so on, building the AGI will be the case, okay, it will be in a game world, because this is sort of the obvious setting that you build a little AGI within. I want to sort of scale the system from, like, I wanted to grow up basically, but this is just one way of saying I wanted to sort of be a continuous learning experience for the system. So I wanted to encounter different levels of abstractions, sort of at the appropriate level of challenge for the system to grow. There's sort of two stages. Like one thing is like I just want to sort of develop it to some level of sophistication where it has like basic planning ability. It sort of starts to have a rudimentary understanding of language, or like it just starts using a sort of proto-language basically is one way of I'm thinking about it. And in this game world that it's sort of navigating. And we're sort of shifting from this little AGI, just learning to form good concepts and sort of just navigate its environment competently, even as this environment over time gets more complicated and sort of new things are added to it. So it's that sort of continuous learning experience. We're sort of shifting from pure like navigation and sort of survival or whatever, like it's meeting its own needs, to once it has reached a certain level of sophistication, now we're thinking about, okay, how do we align this system now? Given that it has now understood how to grow, basically, like you don't need to sort of further incentivize this necessarily. Like these are already basically habits that it has formed. Sort of exploring the world, the environment, and now we're going to introduce something like NPC humans or whatever. Like we're going to have a simple projection of humanity into this game world, and we're sort of going to think very hard about sort of what alignment means in the simplest context and sort of how that scales further. So the idea is now that we progress this to a point where we can actually talk about a pretty complete notion of alignment, given the sort of low complexity world in which this happens. Like there's probably, when we're talking about alignment, like what the AGI needs to be aligned to and so on, there's probably a simpler version of our world that can still hold basically the full concept of alignment, because we cannot specify in all level of detail. Like the details of the real world are not all necessary in order to specify what we want to mean with alignment. It's a deeper notion. It should be a notion, like at least as far as I'm understanding alignment so far, that can be applied in a significantly simpler world, like in a projection of our world. Alignment should already hold there. And it needs to be a notion of alignment that is robust to self-improvement. So if this agent now, if we sort of bring it into a more complicated world than this, like just the next game world, basically. There are different dimensions of change according to which I can make the world more complicated. And I want to sort of observe that the agent holds its alignment, like it basically correctly updates the way it views the world and what the good thing to do is. Like, for instance, what helpful behavior is sort of one proxy in which you can think about it. But there are other ways of thinking about it as well. Like, I think wisdom is a very interesting idea that I'm also sort of considering in this context. Like, what does it mean to behave wisely within that environment? And if this environment now gets more complicated, if there are more pathways of change available in this environment, more ways of interfacing with it, more ways of accomplishing a thing, or like there's a higher level of resolution available to you, how do you update what you're trying to do in response to this increase in complexity? Because there's a basic equivalence between that operation and already being in a complex world and just understanding that complex world more deeply, and therefore sort of unlocking a relationship to a more complex world that you can competently navigate. Like, it's basically whether we just update the resolution of the game world, there's a sort of equivalency between that and the agent already being in a complex environment and just sort of understanding enough to sort of understand the world that it was already in at a new level of resolution, and like making use of that equivalency. I want to be able to sort of safely hand over the reins of its self-development to the AI within a controlled setting, so that we can have, from like a solved notion of alignment, as far as we can tell, as many steps as possible in a more complex world where things are still under control, still sort of visible to us from the outside, where we can see the agent sort of again and again successfully updating on its own how it can look at the new world that it perceives in an aligned way. Like, this is the experiment that I'm really interested in, and that I think there's a lot of onus on sort of to design safely. There are a few notions that are really relevant for like the initial alignment targets that I want to be able to sort of formalize, for instance. So I'm not quite there yet in terms of the sort of second stage. Like, the first stage is just, okay, basic competency, like just understanding really well how this agent will form and so on. And the second stage is really, okay, what is the minimal environment within which a sophisticated notion of alignment is really a sort of coherent concept that we can now sort of develop the agent to, guide the agent to, and sort of adjust it to, so that we can now like shift more of the development of the agent onto the agent itself. So one concept here is, if, for instance, an alignment proxy will involve a non-interference principle. So basically, be careful about the influence that you have on the environment, and don't do like, just adjust your actions so that, especially under uncertainty, you will have minimal expected interference with the normal flow of things. If you help someone, right, if you help a human NPC or whatever in the world, also try to do so in a world that is sort of minimally interfering with the rest of the causal development of that environment. Like, that is a good like concept in order to sort of be put into an AI. Whether we sort of need this in the end to sort of fully specify what alignment should be about, I don't know. But this is a good formal thing to sort of try to understand how to do. And in order to understand non-interference, you need to understand, okay, what are the consequences of my actions? And that involves a notion of self. Like, you need to know, okay, what is the I, what is the self, out of which the causal pathways reach out, that I need to sort of take care of, or that I need to sort of maybe restrict and need to sort of remain responsible over or about. So this is already one reason why this notion of a sort of agency is important to sort of have pinned down more rigorously. There's other stuff there as well in terms of, can we, common theory in alignment suggests inner misalignment. So basically, your agent will, as it forms over time in the training environment, it will sort of find its own little sub-goals, its own little habits, and so on, just preferences that get stuck to it, similarly to how we humans have preferences that evolution didn't explicitly stick into us. It's just, it just happened to sort of be the kind of solution that we found. Just sort of some arbitrary preferences, because it wasn't possible to sort of specify the more abstract goal. So we just approximated in different ways. And here there's also the idea of, okay, you can have meta preferences of like, basically you can later insert things like maybe values into the AI that make it in a principled way shape its own initial preferences to sort of converge towards some ideal preferences. Like it's interested in, like, for instance, bettering itself because it wants to, like, it is driven by some higher value, vision, whatever. You don't need to sort of use too esoteric language for this. You can just sort of call it a sort of a meta objective or something like this, where you have sort of principled ways or preferences about over, like, shaping your own objectives, your own preferences. And unless these preferences originally also included the preference to not be altered, you can do that. But you can probably only do that in a sort of earlier stage of development. At some level of sophistication, any sort of agent will probably discover sort of like sort of goal integrity, that it does not want its own goals to be altered because it's sort of looking into the future and recognizes, okay, if my goal is altered, this will not score well according to my current evaluation of how I will accomplish my goals and so on. And so you so you need to be aware of these dynamics, and you want to sort of develop this in a safe environment. But ultimately, I don't think humans can keep control of these systems. So as you sort of try to align the system within this game environment, you're also trying to hand over the reins to it for which behavior it rewards itself for. And like this sort of handing over process is something that I'm thinking a lot about. And that just depends on a very precise understanding. Like, in order to have a good theory about it, in order to sort of actually expect that this thing that's going to, like, interact with a complex environment, like with a game environment in there, will actually do what I predict it would do, I need, like, just a very good understanding.
Yeah, overall, you're looking at the chunk of chunks, like the largest possible of all of these things. But I think there should be like intermediate linking as well, or intermediate chunking as well, similar to, again, just similar to how a lot of things works in on larger scales. Like you cannot jump from the most fundamental to the like highest implemented solutions. There should be gradual jumps based on some specific amount of steps. So it's like you cannot be collecting all of the information from all of the sources and then directly suddenly being able to combine them all to make the final project. If like first you collect 10 things, then you combine them into one, and then you collect 10 of those things and combine into one. So like that strategy is more better to make the to finally reach to the bigger picture or the bigger thing.
You actually sort of want to build on it from both directions. Like, you want to sort of have top-down and bottom-up process simultaneously, and sort of both should inform each other in terms of the structure that you sort of expect to find in the intermediate. So the way that I'm conceiving of this, like, I don't know how to sort of do the bottom-up analysis of it so that I'm actually aiming towards like an aligned AGI in the end. I need to have some idea of what I mean with alignment, where I'm sort of ultimately aiming at, like, the sort of entity that I want to build towards.
Okay.
That informs the way that I'm thinking about the individual parts. I think it's a very natural thing, if you're thinking about it sort of soundly conceptually, that you're sort of simultaneously approaching from both directions, and the sort of middle part, the intermediate part, is actually what you will sort of clarify at the very last. Although it might still have significant implications.
It's like creating hardware and software both at the same time, and then finally creating the kernel, doing both of them. But it's not like first creating hardware then creating software. And also in your way also, you can, what I think is, use the step thing or the chunking thing, that first gather and chunk a good segment of things from one thing, and then formalize one conclusion from that thing, and then use that conclusion to in the other project or uh, in the other conclusion. And similar to, like, it's like how concepts or how things work in general. First we take 10 thoughts and then we compress them into one final conclusion, and then use that conclusion 10 like those conclusion to compress and make one conclusion. And then like this, if we go to the top, then that way the process is more controllable compared to just taking 100 things and trying to compress them into one thought. So this is what I mean to say while saying that the up-down approach is obviously that more tricky one, and also it has its own problems of converging into middle, because in the middle it might be, it's like two things are going into opposite directions, and making them converge or making them meet at the middle might be the hardest part in the end. So both have their own problems.
Think about like markets, for instance. There's sort of many like complex systems sort of tend to have this dynamic that you have feedback loops between the sort of highest and the sort of lowest layer. And the intermediate is sort of some translation process between the two. But the sort of really important things are those two layers. Like with the market dynamics, for instance, like each individual has their own interests, like they have their own needs and their own resources and so on. And if they start trading and so on, right, after some time, you will get an implicit evaluation of all the different goods and services that the individuals can offer, which is now like you get a formation of the top-down thing now. Like you get the formation of, okay, how is everything priced? How is everything valued after we have sufficient interactions between them? But this creates a new incentive structure for people to sort of create certain resources to sort of train themselves to be able to offer certain services and so on, which will conversely, again, affect what each individual has in supply and what they have in demand and so on. And you have a sort of feedback loop here. And that feedback loop is very, very strongly determined by the top and the bottommost layer. So sort of understanding those and possible like rules for those, right? It's not just the top layer is not just fully. You can identify rules about the top layer, like you can identify dynamics and patterns and so on. Like there's certain things that are stable and possible for the top layer, independent of what exactly happens at the bottom layer. This is really important to understand the chaos in the middle, because it's an extremely complex system if you look at it with a non-trivial number of participants. And I think this is again a system, like it's a sufficiently complex system that you cannot really model it fully. You sort of need to find some clever way of approximating it, sort of making sense of it. If you want to predict, for instance, whether it halts at some point, like whether this just keeps spinning into some, like maybe it spins out of control, like maybe it gets into a very unstable state where the sort of demand outweighs the supply by a large amount and you cannot really adjust to it after some cycle, like it spins out of control. Perhaps it sort of finds a sort of transgressive equilibrium where it sort of keeps moving, but it keeps being balanced, or just sort of finds a point of stillness where, okay, you're locked in now. There's just sort of different patterns now that sort of lead to the fact that it always self-corrects back to the current arrangement that it has after some perturbation and so on. There are different dynamics like this, and sort of the main way of predicting them is having a very good understanding of how the top conditions relate to the bottom conditions in terms of the change that it enables over time. And like this is one way that I'm thinking about. Like this is another nonlinear dynamic similar to exaptation that you can only like you cannot fully model, but that you really need to appreciate in order to be able to handle the level of complexity and sort of feedback if you're sort of developing a dynamically intelligent exploring system.
Alignment is necessary, and that we need to do that finally or eventually. Sometimes we will need to do it, but before alignment we also need to pause the AI development, or to actually get some time so that we can finally do that, stop the things from going bad so that we can start making them good. Yeah, so that's a good way to think about it. I've not thought about it. I was just thinking about making things good on the upper end. And the other thing about the self-treatment and later state, that is also important. The one of the core thing that I can think in all of this is making this concept of correlations without causations. Making this very clear would be very helpful with respect to self-treatment and future regulations of the system. Like after a point when we are making them exist and be agent of their own, at that moment this concept of correlation without causation, at this moment all of the models, all of the agents are not properly able to understand this concept. They are based on correlations. They are designed on all of the problems of hallucination at this moment exist because when there is correlation but there is no causation. But this is not apparent to the model or to the AI agent. So this is the other fundamental thing that we need to make clear to the machines, or like have realization of this concept. And the last thing of meta objective, this is one of the other goals of my wisdom thing, that wisdom is supposed to work with terminal goals, how intelligence is supposed to work with the instrumental goals. And yeah, the best way to work with this meta objective thing or the terminal goals is to make wisdom as per me, so that they can be self-correcting of their terminal goal by themselves.
That's a good point to end for today.
Sure, because also it's too late for me to sleep. It's 1:37 a.m.